Now, since this is the first international event of Women in Finance, our first panel will also go beyond Belgian borders and will provide inspiring stories from sister platforms in our neighboring countries and critical perspectives from international networks that are also dedicated to accelerate on diversity and equality. And after this panel, finally, there will be some time for a Q&A, so we will hear from you. So make sure to write down your questions during the panel. This fireside chat will be moderated by Marie-Elisabeth, and as a member of the Executive Committee of Women in Finance and responsible for international alliances, she's truly one of the driving forces behind the event today. Welcome to the stage, Marie-Elisabeth. And next, I invite Alberta on stage to give us some insights on Luxembourg. She's the City Country Officer for Luxembourg and a member of the North American Banks Association and a venture mentor in the University of Luxembourg's Startups program. Now for Germany, I feel like I'm in the Eurovision Song Festival. I invite Anna on stage, who, after several management roles in investment banking, made a career switch to start hermoney.de. This is Germany's largest personal finance portal for women, and she also initiated and manages the largest career network, Fondsfrauen, for women in finance in the German-speaking countries. And next up is Fabienne. You are invited on stage. She will give us some insights on UK and France. Fabienne has been working for more than 20 years in the financial services and is currently a partner with the consulting firm Ampersand Partners. She's developing the UK network Women in Banking and Finance in France. And then for the Netherlands, I invite Ellen Kok on stage. She's the Labor Affairs Manager at the Dutch Banking Association and looks after the interest of the members in the field of employment conditions and labor relations. And now we have two panelists that offer a more international perspective. We have Burtzak. You are invited on stage. She's the Director of Financing Sustainable Growth in the European Banking Federation. And then, last but not least, I would like to invite Hedwige on stage, CEO of the International Banking Federation and Chair of the European Women on Board since 2021. Voilà, Marie-Elisabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Laura. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Women in Finance Belgium. We have indeed a very powerful panel today, and I'm truly delighted to have you, dear speakers, on board in person, joining our first international event today. Thank you so much. We have here for you the true movers and shakers of diversity and inclusion and equality in our neighboring countries and at international level, European with Burtzak and international with Hedwige. On stage, we have expertise, experience, competencies, energy, and vision. We also have an amazing combination of multiple cultures and stories that should inspire us at different levels for our intervention, day to day and more long term. A very powerful mix. So let's get cracking. The session I proposed to you today, I've organized it in two parts. One part to get inspiration from our colleagues from other countries experiencing the challenges of our Women in Finance Belgium under different skies. Second part, aspiration. What can we change to deliver on diversity, inclusion, and equality, and faster? Where is the good stuff that we can build on? What can we do better? And how perhaps we can also cooperate better? So let me start with Germany. And Anne, if you can grab them, we would have to share these mics. How would you describe the situation in Germany explaining also how you have come about setting up certain initiative and launching certain ventures.
How much time do we have? Well, first of all, it's a huge delight to be here. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to travel after these dire COVID times into your beautiful city. And I'm very impressed what you said today. But let me get started about what we're doing. The reason we launched Fonds Frauen and Her Money was I've been, as you had said in the introduction, a long-standing executive in the German asset management industry. I was the head of Morningstar. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the organization. I started the operations for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And I, in total, was at Morningstar for 15 years. And over time, you realize, why am I the only woman in the room? And I'd been active in the space more politically to get more women and kind of, network. And when in Germany the quota was introduced, where you now have to have 30% women on public boards of public companies, I asked myself one Sunday morning on my kitchen table, what are we doing in the asset management industry? And the answer was quickly given, there was really nothing. And so I teamed up with a few other women that I knew, and we got together and they said, look, great idea, why don't you draft up a plan? And Fonds Frauen was founded. And now we've been in business for 7 years. We're a GmbH. We're not a, what do you call it, a Verein, as we say in German. So it's a business, and that was part of the strategy, because what we do is not charity. It's a business case, getting more women across the board. And now we have about 60 organizations who support us. We're the largest network for women in finance in the German-speaking regions. And we have about 3,000 women who are active with us. So that's the background setting. And when I launched this and I realized there was so much potential, and it was a huge success from the minute we had our first event like this, I decided to make this my full-time job. I run Fonds Frauen today. I left Morningstar after 15 years working there, and I launched another business called Her Money. And Her Money is now the largest retail website for personal finance for women in Germany. And I'll stop because I could go on and on.
We're going to have to share mics, not just our stories, for inspiration. So in France, Fabienne, were you starting to develop a network that looks very much like ours, probably on a bigger scale? Why do we need yet another network in France, and what are you bringing from your experience and knowledge of the big and large and famous UK business, Women in Banking and Finance UK? That is it a transposition that you're going to bring to the French context?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and indeed to explain the dream behind setting up, women in banking and finance in France. Just to give you a bit of context, WIBF actually in the UK has been going on for 40 years, 40, as opposed to 3 for this network. And the idea post-Brexit was very much to nurture the sharing of experience, of talent between London and Paris. Hence this idea of having, a sister network funded in Paris. Why do we believe that France needs yet another network? I guess it comes back to the question of, do we believe quotas are good enough to actually solve the issue? Because France is a beautiful case study. We've been leading the way with quotas, and today France has 43% of representation on boards, which clearly is number 1 in Europe. But is it enough? Actually, I don't believe so. Our mantra is to connect, to challenge, and very much to inspire the environment to believe that the change is possible and can be much faster than it is. So that's very much what we're trying to do, to really leverage all of our learnings. We believe that our superpower is to connect all together and to drive and shape the culture of the industry going forward.
Thank you, and good luck. And we share actually quite a lot of the mantra connecting, sharing, and inspiring. So we certainly will work together. The point you made, Anne, about the German-speaking countries makes me think of Luxembourg. And we have Alberta with us, who's traveled today to join this event. And Alberta, Luxembourg is associated with finance and vice versa. What do you see happening? Do you have networks, initiatives similar to what we've just heard about and what we are trying to do in this country?
Does this work? Oh, wonderful. So we can share on this side. So Marie-Thérèse, exactly. But no, thank you. You know, it's interesting, and you know, you're absolutely correct. Luxembourg is one of the leading financial centers in Europe and globally. We touch upon, right, the asset management industry and it being one of the largest fund hubs in the world. You know, if I look, I think that from a country perspective, there's a tremendous commitment to diversity. Luxembourg has a diversity charter. It celebrates its 10-year anniversary this year in regards to really pushing forward the diversity and the social equality agenda in Luxembourg. If we look at the financial sector, I think that there's a lot more that we can and we should do. I had the privilege and the honor of having a roundtable lunch with the Minister of Finance, Yuriko Bakes. She's the first female Minister of Finance in Luxembourg. She was appointed, took over the role in January of this year, and she has made it one of her #1 priorities to improve the numbers and you know, the diversity and inclusion in the financial sector. Because to give just an example, you know, not exact numbers, but of I think 148 banks that are in Luxembourg, 6 are led by women. And so we have a lot of work to do, but there's a really strong will and commitment from the minister, who for her this is very, very close, and also from the financial sector itself. So, you know, whether it's the Luxembourg Banks Association, but we're very, very early in this journey in regards to, you know, thinking of how do we want to bring this forward? Is it via a network? Is it, you know, in what form it is? But we all recognize that we can do a lot better. And that's, I think, the first step. I would just say another point, and I want to thank Natalie and Claire. I thought that the survey was really thought-provoking, and thank you so much. One of the issues we face, and in the discussion we had, the roundtable discussion we had with the minister, was our data is from 2018. We don't have more recent data from a Luxembourg financial sector perspective. And so for us to measure and, you know, where do we want to go, right? We actually need more recent data to build on that, right? Because, you know, if we don't know where we're starting from, you know, it's very difficult to say, well, this is where we're starting from and this is where we want to go, you know, in X number of years and how we want to go about it. So that's, I think, one of the big factors currently.
Very much for sharing. At Women in Finance Belgium, it is part of our core assumption, actually, that what gets done. So when we stress there's so much we can do and better and faster without the data, and this is why our initiative, and I'm sure we'll be working much closer all together, is so much relying, and it makes it legitimate that you bring the data that is also accepted by the sector, because it is a sector contributing. So part of our work as a signatory to our charter, basically the member commits to measure, as Christine stressed in her speech, and also gets benchmark as a feedback against, you know, acceptable other players. So, yes, go on.
I was very impressed with the numbers that you showed and having this high participation, because we do these regularly in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the participation is a struggle. So I would like to know, how did you guys make sure that everybody answered? What triggers did you pull? Please let me know.
And I won't give all the secrets now, but a very impressive element, for I've seen many surveys, struggling to be delivered on time. This happened in less than 2 months with us. And so we might, look into that.
We have more reason to talk, don't we? Yeah.
So impressive. And it is also making, the data very fresh, very hot, and very usable. So if I ask Ellen for a bit of context on the Dutch environment, so Ellen, you're at the core of banking efforts at the federation level. What can you tell us that you've seen changing, and what would you recommend that perhaps happens faster or differently in the Dutch context?
Well, first of all, we have a new board, a new chairman of the Dutch Banking Association, and it's a woman. So she's there since last year. Well, she was very busy with a new strategy for the association, together with all the CEOs of the bigger banks. And well, our new strategy is strong banks, strong society, and a main topic is social inclusiveness. So, and they, the scope is three pillars, three spheres of influence, like the personal and organization, products and services, and social responsibility. And I think it's very important to have such a sector strategy, because that gives one commitment at the top of all the banks, and it gives a framework for further collaboration, further elaboration on what are we to do as a sector, and what can organizations do on their own. If I look at the situation up till now, from my point of view at the Dutch Banking Association, I'm very busy with my working group, and we do all kinds of initiatives which are very helpful. But I think it's very important to have a sector strategy as well, to have sector ambitions, sector target setting, as well as organizational on an organizational level. And I think this strategy really will help us to make that step further.
Yeah, so it's very structured. Thank you very much, and we wish you then all the best as you engage into
Thank you very much.
New life. So that's effectively what you're sharing with us. It's one tip. It's to have a strategy, to have KPIs, to have a structure to move forward. Would the colleagues representing the other countries would like to share one important tip if we are to accelerate in our sector on inclusion? What would be that tip?
Well, maybe I can start myself, because I think I have one. What I would say is make things visible and do quantitative analysis, as we did already on several topics, like, for instance, how inclusive are your products and services? And one of our banks did a big research on that. For instance, gender pay gap. Several banks did investigations on that kind of topics. And we also have a gender due diligence tool now. So I think it's very important to measure, to create awareness, and well, to have the status quo. So that was one tip from myself.
That's one tip. Another one.
Another one which actually Ellen touched upon.
Defend you want the same, and why?
No, but yeah, exactly, and set targets, right? As an industry, set targets, or because that can be quite, can quite engender a lot of discussion, and it can be quite a topic of controversy. Let's say aspirations, if we want to, but I really do think that, we should set targets, right, in terms of where we want to get to, and measure against those targets.
Yes, 100% agreed. That's why we do research. For the third time in a row, we've worked with KPMG to kind of benchmark where the industry is at. Similar to you, we asked the industry, but we would have liked to have a little bit more higher participation. We've also worked with a very esteemed university professor on that, which is helpful. And so yes, having some target, keeping the finger in the wound is the point. And ladies, make some noise. You know, we work in Germany with the most well-reputed business newspaper, Handelsblatt. And when that gets on the table of everybody in the offices, that's not really good news if your company is not in line. So I think that's important to get some media attention involved, because you can do all the nice quotas that you want, you can publish all the wonderful papers. If nobody in the broadness reads about it, they don't really care. So to us, it's important to keep the finger in the wound and benchmark and ask some tough questions. Like we questioned with the last research we've done, what's your gender quota or gender pay gap? We got 0 response. Now, mind you, there's laws that say that you should measure that, you know, so there's a lot more work to be done. And in my experience, nothing really would have worked in my country without quotas, without rules from the government. We had enough initiatives that said, you know, we as an industry were bright enough, right? We can do this ourselves, this women's stuff. Well, they didn't. So as soon as we had the quotas, things moved along. And so I think it's a combination of quoting it, you know, us getting organized, making some noise, and getting the government involved.
More tips, please. And double, please, UK and French.
Yes, so from the UK perspective, clearly the legal framework has been around giving guidance and the legal requirement actually to disclose the gender gap, but there's been no quotas. What I'd like to reflect on is the type of initiatives that I've worked. And I think it reflects very nicely on the results of your survey around the fact that women might consider leaving their companies because of the culture, number one, and because of the leadership style, number two. So fundamentally for me, you know, what type of intervention could we have? We could have very targeted behavioral interventions for men and women to explore unconscious biases that make all of us unable to really understand the reality that the other person is living. And so we had some success with some companies having coaching interventions around that in order to make everyone gender bilingual, if I may say. So I like this notion of, you know, bilingual in terms of gender. So that's perhaps the tip from the UK. The tips from France, as I was saying, you know, clearly there's been quotas. There is more ambition now around increasing the number of senior women in executive leadership positions, which is the next challenge. I would say, let's be ambitious. Let's connect. I mean, for me, the connection and the sharing around our collective talent and ideas is really key to challenge the current culture. So that would be my 2 tips.
Thank you so much, and all of you we have quite a bucket list. The good news is that we actually, for sure at Women in Finance, working on all of this. Even the bilingual notion takes quite a meaning in this country. We work on, you know, improving adverts to recruit, using different languages, coaching, etc. So a lot, I think, makes for everything so that we look at things, the glass is just, you know, half full rather than half empty. So pretty positive stuff. Thank you very much. Let me now turn to the colleagues from the Federation. So Burshak, at the European level, would you say we have a perfect storm with players so much more aware and perhaps eager to act, take their future in their very own hands, and at the same time legislators helping us with improved frameworks?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And I want to start by saying what a what an honor and pleasure it is to be here, because actually we as the European Banking Federation have been working on this topic for the last 3 years. And frankly, our starting point was indeed women in finance. You were our model. And I also want to acknowledge how much I have learned from Claire personally. And so it's really a pleasure to be here for that. Now, as the EBF, what we have observed over these last 3 years is that at the policy level in the EU, in Brussels, something is changing, and even internationally, I would say, because there's more and more of an awareness that diversity, especially through the prism of gender, is good for the financial performance of a company, of any company, certainly even more so for a financial sector company. And there's awareness that the things that happen in a diverse company are also very good for society. So, for instance, the ECB is looking at the links between climate change and the diversity of companies, financial sector companies. The IMF has even put a number on how much better your rate of return is as a company if you are diverse. So things like that, I think, are really raising awareness that if you are diverse as a company, it's good for you, it's good for your shareholders, it's good for your employees, future employees, candidates, because it's a better place to work and be creative and solve solutions. Solve problems. Also, it's just a human right. I personally find that there's more awareness in today's world that it is also by itself really a goal. So it doesn't have to be just useful. It's diversity is really the right thing to do. So that's a positive thing. It also means that more people are watching, with more indicators coming, with ESG reporting, for instance, due diligence, lots of different EU legislation, and not just the ones on labor, but a lot of things on the financial sector, which means that more and more what really is happening in a company will be very visible to the outside world, and it will be visible and even comparable within a sector and across sectors, which I think raises really the stakes for banks, because banks really will have to not just rely on self-reporting and self-targeting, we're doing this and that, it's so much better than last year, 5 years ago, but they will really have to stand up to scrutiny when compared with other companies in the economy, other banks, and even across the Atlantic, etc. It means it will probably have a cost of capital impact, vis-a-vis your shareholders. Not just the talent, but also the shareholders' pressure will rise. The talent attraction, competitiveness in that sense. Where we are compared to that, given that stakes are rising and pressure is rising and regulation is becoming more and more acute, not just in terms of reporting, but also the targets. It's not just enough to report on your board, but it's important to have a certain number. It means that where we are is not enough. I'm sure Hedwig will talk about how the banking sector compares to the rest of the economy, but I've looked at your numbers. I see that the EU banking sector is a little bit better than the EU average, but we know that it's not enough, especially given that the banking sector is a catalyst. So if they're better, then it will be better for them, because, by the way, they're a knowledge-intensive sector. So banks stand to gain more in terms of financial performance if they're diverse. And they will also do more for financing an inclusive and sustainable society than other sectors. We see a lot of regional differences. We see front runners, and we are very proud of even the small impact maybe we may have had on them, because we know that as the EBF, we helped 4 of our members to adopt women's empowerment principles. FEBALFIN was anyway already up there in terms of a role model. So the others were also very aware, and we have now Austria, very active. I want to mention them, Luxembourg, ABBL, and very recently also Spain is very active. You have front-runner banks. Many of them are actually in this room. I think Belgian, Dutch banks are very advanced. It's something to be proud of. On the other hand, you see not enough of an awareness across the board that this is something good for the bank, and it's something that has to be a part of your internal strategy. You shouldn't wait until the regulators are knocking at your door or your investors are looking at the very detailed reports that you will be required to publish, because by the time they have all the information, it will be probably a little bit too late. So we're advising everyone, all our members, to understand that diversity has to be their own internal strategy. They have to think of where it can make the biggest impact. It can be clients, it can be market outreach, maybe they don't have the right approach in terms of products, and above all, of course, talent. I'll stop there, thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's quite hopeful. But we hear that while certainly Belgian and Dutch financial sector may not be so bad, it still needs as a whole to embrace the issues and bite and deliver, translate it in own organization. Is it the same impression, Edwige, you have at the international level, talking from your perspective as a International Banking Federation, but also then opening up, onto the Women on Board organization you represent?
Yes, thank you so much, Marie-Elisabeth. So I have the pleasure to have had 36 years experience in the banking industry, and I started my career just across the road in '86 at KBC from Christine. So I have a long experience, and since more than 20 years, as soon as I got my first management position, I decided I'm going to help other women. So I've been trying to be a champion for other women for more than 20 years. And now, so many years later, I'm the CEO of the International Banking Federation, working together with Burçak. And I can say I see the whole world. So we see banks from the US in our federation, China, Australia, Latin America, so representing 90% of the banking industry. There are huge differences. As also in Europe, because Eastern Europe used to be very female-oriented, even at the level of the CEOs. We still see that in India. On average, you don't see it. So there is a large movement, as Burçak was saying, to have more women on boards. Still a lot of work to be done. The banking industry is a little bit better. At CEO level, it's still dramatic, as it is in all kinds of industries. So I would say, even in my organization, the International Banking Federation, when I started in 2015, we had 7 men in the board. I was the CEO. Now I can say that we are 3 women, and that the next chair will be a Japanese woman. And that's work behind the scenes for years. So it's change that we all have to do. And my secret has always been not to be right myself, because that doesn't help, but to try to find allies and to find common causes, adding the right thing that we think about half of the population to something that others might see as well. So in the banking industry, we have plenty of bridges that we can make. Sustainability. We know that we need sustainability expertise in the board, in executive committees. We know that we need that bridge to public opinion, to the younger generation. And everything that we have been fighting for as women is actually also interesting and important for the younger generation. We as women, we still have a lot of work to do ourselves to enable more diversity in each circle. So at IBFED, I can say I've did my job really to have that diversity at board level. I'm so proud, and I won't tell you what I had to do to get a Japanese woman on my board, but I did it. So I can't give you the secret or not. So.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure there might be questions to get into that. So let me first thank for all the statements and suggestions so far. And perhaps we take now questions from the floor. I hand over my mic. If you have a question, please stand up, introduce yourself, and tell us for whom the question is on the panel. It's always difficult to be the first.
Voilà. Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Danielle Moens, and I'm founder of the House for Wellbeing and already for many years active in creating inclusion and especially gender diversity and balance in masculine and feminine qualities. I'm very happy to see what the evolution is doing. And especially the surveys was very interesting to see how important leadership actually is. And as many of you know, we already published the book, The Balanced Leader, in 2011, balancing the masculine and feminine characteristics. So I heard you say that it's very important to have targets. And my question is, knowing that creativity, empathy, and human interconnectedness is so important and actually the solution to not only engage women but also keep them in the industry. My question is, how would you consider to measure that and to measure the progress?
Who would like to?
So I would like to respond to your question and also to a question that you raised. Actually, we have quite good figures available. At the level of Europe, it's EIGE who's taking care of that, and we as European Women on Boards, we did some additional homework on that. So there are figures available, and as we speak, Daniel, there's a big buzz here in Brussels. Evelyn Regner and others are fighting to get the board directive done. So I hope we will get her soon, because this is really going to change the situation in Europe. And if you want, we can give you all the figures at EIGE, all the European Union states are there, and we can give you also the detailed figures for the banking industry compared to others for the European largest companies.
Yeah. Just speak into it.
Is it on? Oh yeah, thank you. No, I absolutely agree. I would add, and another interesting statistic from the study was where 68% felt that those soft skills are very important, only 20% felt that they were incentivized financially in their firms, right? Which I thought was extremely striking. And I think one of the ways to address that, and I can speak for my own bank, but one of the ways to address that is, you measure and evaluate a person's performance not only on the what, but on the how. And on the how, where you have very clear leadership principles that are defined and that they define effectively not only, how we expect our leaders to be and how we expect them to behave, but what are the values that drive that leadership. And therefore, you are evaluated and compensated on two scales, the what and the how. And the how is very much about those soft skills, and it's very much about how you define yourself as a leader and demonstrate those values that are, that are key, that are part of our culture.
I learned a lot since I've arrived here. Not only I've met a lot of interesting people, but I will incorporate that in what we do now as an organization. I know from my former employer, we had what we called 360-degree reviews, and that was an element in that, because at Morningstar, the culture was always very important. It wasn't only, did you get the biggest deals, but, were you a good corporate citizen? How did you interact with others? By the way, they always had a lot of women there, and a lot of people from all kinds of nations. So there was a very unique culture at Morningstar, which helped me excel, but also measured how people were inside. And I think all institutions today, if you want to attract young talent, new talent, if you want to attract and retain female talent in particular, you have to have it as a measurement. It's not a nice to have anymore. And when you're talking about measuring, I think also very important and very, very effective is measuring how, when you talk about diversity, getting women, a certain number of women in certain positions, if you tie that to the bonus of an executive, miraculously, the quotas are met. So what about there aren't enough women? I don't know about that. So money talks. And so I think this is crucial. And from organizations, we know that have done this really well. That always was the one that got it moving, the needle moving in terms of women in leadership.
Thank you. Do we have one more question? Over there.
No? Yes? Hello, thank you for the organization. I'm Issa Nawash. I'm a societal entrepreneur working on sustainable changes. I have maybe a thought, and I would like to your opinion on that. When previously there was a talk about maternity leave, actually for me I had like a kind of revelation when I had my first child. So previously I always thought that society discriminated women when we have a kid because of the pregnancy. It's a kind of heavy. We tend to not want to take only a day off because we will be seen as weak and not able to work anymore. But when I had my first kid and seeing that my husband had to go back to work after only 10 days, it makes me think that actually society discriminates men against their own kid. So, and so, I mean, always when you talk about that, we talk about the economic value of getting women going back to work earlier, which is okay. I mean, it's very important that we are independent financially, and indeed, maternity leave has a cost for us. But for me, we should also talk about the social value of having men taken care of and having the right to be a father in the early days of their kids. And I think for that, we can be together, men and women, because generally, when we talk about feminism, we tend to confront the views. And here, I really think that this is something that we should maybe push a little bit further and be together, and also hope that also men has the right to have more holidays to spend time with their kids without being judged and without losing too much money. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's a statement, invites us to think of allyship, and as you will see, this is going to be our first panel this afternoon. I think we will close here this first session for panel. I thank you so very much for your openness, for joining us, and I hope you all stay long enough so that we can grab you at the end of the afternoon or over the cocktail times to work a bit further and bring more questions to you. But thank you so much, and thank you.
So, when everybody has taken their seat again. Yeah. Okay, people, before we head into the break, we actually have a super special guest for you who will give us a critical analysis of the progress of diversity across Europe. Where are we moving forward and where are we getting stuck? So this is really our guest of honor today, Ms. Evelyn Regner, the Vice President of the European Parliament. Ms. Regner, the floor is all yours.
Yes, now you can hear me. You can hear me maybe too well, so I start again. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Madame Husling, thank you very much for the occasion to be here today. I really wanted to come here in person because this is the place to be here in this building, Women in Finance. So I think this is also a very important message, and therefore it's a great pleasure, a great honor to just share some thoughts from the European Parliament with you. I just come straight, so I even shortened it because I wanted to be with you here from a shadow meeting on the famous gender balance on boards, the Women on Boards Directive, where we'll have, and I'm knocking here on wood because we're within the trilogue negotiations next week in Strasbourg. I'm really knocking on wood right now. because having hopefully the last trilogue on this issue. And I really would like to mention that because there is such a long story behind that. So many of you fighting side by side on this issue, that a women's place, of course, is on the top. I mean, where else? And to share this also, as I could really listen right now in a very inspired message sent right now from the audience, sharing this with men, because I don't have to address anything here in this room, that women, of course, are fantastically qualified, doing universities, being practically fantastic, doing everything that more or less should have as a conclusion to be there at the top floor together with men, and to be there in the middle management together with men, to be there when it's about all jobs, so somehow that we represent it in a way that makes the society, but also the economy, resilient and strong and successful, because that's it, what's it about. When we are sharing, we think of consumers, we think of shareholders, and we simply think of equality and justice, and that should be the case. But we are not there, and we are aware of that. And therefore, I don't give you all the arguments and the history, because you all know that. Yes, it's not so long ago. When I was a child, my mother had to share her bank account with her father, because at this time they had to ask if they would like to have a bank account. So somehow we are looking back already, due to fighting women and also some men, that progress has been achieved. A lot of progress, especially in Belgium. We see, when we look at the figures, how is the percentage improving? There is a result. There is a huge progress due to you fighting for that, because we always need both commitment and really acting, also on a voluntary basis, but we need binding measures, because if we don't have those binding measures, we achieve maybe some progress, but then we get stuck. And right now we are in the situation, looking back in at the last years and also months, when just looking at the coronavirus, but also at the backlash movements we have all over the world, that there is a lot of pressure on both men and women, that these things, these achievements, are in danger. And on the other side, because we're talking today about progress, you can really rely on what we are pushing within the European Union. We are negotiating on pay transparency, one of the big mosaics. Countries have to implement that, the work-life balance directive, which is so important that both men and women can push it to be at home, maybe sometime with their children, but also to push a career. And we are, and therefore this is really a strong sign back, and I think that should be motivating to all of you. We are back on track on the Women on Boards Directive. Yes, we are looking back 10 years that this is more or less waiting, and you all, I see here some fighters side by side when doing this, and waiting so much time. Yes, we're looking back at those 10 years, but now we are looking at a presidency, a French presidency, who is absolutely committed. We are looking at a commission, Ursula von der Leyen, absolutely committed, and of course, Commissioners Dalli, Jourova. So we're really fighting side by side, and of course, we in the European Parliament. And we are right now about to draft what is really high time. Some countries achieved already, France being really the best, but also Belgium in a very progressive position, but which would be really an issue to be implemented all over Europe. So really to have gender balance on boards. I don't shy away and say I rather would like have even 50%, and why not sometimes having 60% women on board? So is there a mistake in that? So somehow we could go even further. But we're really at the end of the negotiations. not finished yet, again I say, but here things will improve to the better. And I think especially in these days, this is an important message that we can expect from the European institutions, that improvements are made for both men and women. Because, and insofar we'll end right now this intervention with this, yes, also I get to know when being in debates with both men and women, I really have to do with angry young men who say, yes, we would like to stay some time with our children. We would like to have the leadership position. We would like to be in a top position in finance, but not around the clock. And the same is for women. So when fighting for these binding measures, when fighting for quota, we do, I think, a good job for the whole society. And I think that's it, how the European Union should look like, that we're looking in difficult times to a situation where we can see when there is Madame Lagarde at the table, and we know that she's doing a lot in the ECB, that we have another picture, that we're looking at the picture of her with the governors from the central banks being both men and women. And this, of course, in all other financial institutions as well. So thank you very much.
Actually, Ms. Regner, you can stay on stage because we have a question for you from our chat. Maria, if you could help. Yeah, you can go after the pupitre. Yeah.
So I will just say it very. Thank you. There's a question from one of the participants in Spain, and I quote: "Are there plans for gender pay gap reporting across Europe? Measure what matters."
Yes, of course. I mean, we already have a position. Yes, there are. We need to have transparency on the pay gap, because, I mean, facts and figures, that's always the first means in order to really to fight the pay gap. And we already have a Parliament's position of the European Parliament on the gender pay gap. And we are starting, hopefully very soon, the negotiations with the Council. So we're really ahead of the trilogue. Why we haven't started, I think it's, in this case, not a political thing, it's more a technical thing. As the French presidency is so committed on the Women on Boards Directive, it's one thing after the other. The Czech presidency already indicated, yes, they're interested, it's already on the agenda, so we will have these negotiations. And what are they about? They are about, in order to fight the pay gap, we need transparency. A woman needs to know, and a man needs to know, I mean, all women need to know to be able to compare themselves within the company where they are. And therefore, for example, it will be, according to this proposal, forbidden when you're having a job interview that you are asked, what was your salary beforehand? Because otherwise it would be, the pay gap would be enshrined until the end of the days. So this will be forbidden. And for the salaries, for the comparison, when you just discover that there is a pay gap within the company, where there is an exact tool set, how every company could be able to apply it, so you're introducing into the Excel data where you just normally have the salaries, you can introduce via a tool set presented from the European Institute of Gender Equality, developing all that very well. The possibility to compare the salaries within a company. And if differences are seen, of course, the company should catch up, I mean, should more or less pay better women. And if they are not doing that, in this proposal and in this position of the European Parliament, and hopefully also after the negotiations with the Council, there are these options to go to the court, strong individual rights, with the change of the burden of proof, which of course is an important instrument, and also the possibility to have the collective redress, so that you're not more or less under the pressure as an individual to go to the court, which is always a very tough story, but to go to your trade union, for example, or to a women's association, or your partner on board really to do this. And insofar, the answer is yes, because we need strong women on the top who are opening the doors for all those coming behind her. But of course, we need also the necessity. We have the necessity to close the pay gap. So to go on having both men and women in equal positions requires always the whole picture and the whole mosaic.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Wegner. I thank you in the name of the participants.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With this high energy, we